Hello, my name is Elijah Wells, and today's review is Pixar's and Leslie Mann's new movie, Inside Out 2. Taking place 2 years after the events of the first film, which set back in 2015, the new film, Inside Out 2, follows Riley as she joins a summer camp, which is essentially an ice hockey boot camp, essentially, while also her emotions being joy, disgust, anger, sadness, and fear were all swimming along, all doing fine until new emotions pop up, being anxiety, emu, or boredom, embarrassment, and nostalgia, of course. They all, wouldn't say completely screw up the plan that Joy had been working on for the past 13 or so years, and also envy, of course. And not just they completely screwed up her plan, of course, they need to find Riley's sense of self after Riley experienced really severe anxiety attacks during the summer camp. Pixar, as a studio and as a brand, has a really rough start to this decade, to the point the last major commercial hit was the Toy Story 4 film from 2019. And when the pandemic rolled around during the same weekend when Onward came about, the films were either did really poorly in the box office, like Onward did, as it was released just only weeks before the pandemic hit. And there's also Lightyear, which was more fake, which I remember more for the conservative outcry about a gay couple. But there's also what I call the Disney Plus trilogy, where pretty much what felt like the entirety of Pixar's next upcoming releases were going to be on Disney Plus, like Luca, there was Soul, there was Turning Red, which all ended up with just a Disney Plus release. Until relatively recently, they just got released in cinemas to some okay affair in the box office when it comes to like re-release standards. So of course, anticipation was not just high for the new Inside Out movie, but also hopes as well as Pixar, as they could finally get their decade started and finally get back on top of the box office, which they frankly did. But what does it say about the quality of the movie? So, let's find out. Even though Inside Out has garnered a reputation within Pixar's filmography as one of the more grown-up and more mature films of their entire filmography, but in this sequel, this is definitely the more this definitely feels like a lot has changed, and of course the movie itself has grown up a lot more and definitely matured a lot more, particularly in the showcasing with Riley, who definitely her character development, particularly like in the first film, is definitely one of the stronger suits in this movie, and her emotions pretty much support her as well as pretty much almost break her down when they have their own story of trying to reclaim Riley's sense of self, which is the nice little blooming flower that is in the back of Riley's head, or back of the HQ, which is again a very neat and very interesting concept that reassures Riley in a more positive and more negative way, which is again which is something I found really interesting as well. The animation in Inside Out 2, particularly in the film, is really amazing, like I said earlier. Not just in the third act of the movie, which I do not want to spoil in any way, but when you get to that scene, particularly where it massively involves anxiety, it is like an amazing scene, like how they pulled off both in animation and in effects-wise, and also how they did it like in editing as well, and how the camera kind of plays around with the juxtaposition of both Riley and her mindset as well, which is something that is like incredible in my opinion. No pun intended, Pixar. But also, there was also one specific scene I also really like how they pulled it off in animation. Is they go into Riley's deep dark secrets, where they have her video game crush, which is essentially a tribute to Cloud from the Final Fantasy VII video games, where he is seen as very pixelated, almost on the same avenue, like say, like an early video game from the 90s or 2000s, particularly around the fame of the Final Fantasy films, which does beg the question: does Advent children exist in this universe? And I really don't want to know if the Italian Senate situation also happens in this universe. Again, also, there's also the new character, which is a preschool character, or what was her name? Pouchy, who's basically a preschool character that Riley grew up with, who's also hand-drawn, mostly in a digital sense. But putting that in juxtaposition with both the CG world environment as well as a character who's a nod to the more rough, pixelated video game caricatures from the 90s, 2000s, and also a more hand-drawn preschool animation, and how they all collide into this one thing, which is also really beautiful to look at. And it's also a movie we do learn a lot more about Riley, not just to her music taste, but also her past crushes as well, and also the stuff that she's currently still into at the moment. Like in the first film, and thankfully still in the second film, she's still really into hockey, which is again something that is really good, and also plays a majorly vital role in a film, and also her career aspects as well, which they do touch on quite a bit as both a hockey player and any alternatives that she does, which is again a very interesting thing that Pixar has managed to pull off, as well as anxiety and how she plays into the we must think of this situation and after that situation and this situation and that situation, like overthinking the next steps to the point to overthinking the next so many other steps as well, which is essentially the definition of anxiety, which does pull off and execute really well in my opinion, being voiced by Mara Hawke as well as the brilliant voice performance of Amy Poehler, who plays Joy, who in this movie again matured a lot more than the first film in my opinion, and also particularly in one scene where she essentially has a mental breakdown. She doesn't know her way back into HQ, and she struggles to find Riley's sense of self as well, which again really interesting. How again the writing, particularly in the first film, it's also a major strong suit, particularly in the Inside Out film series in my opinion. Particularly how they delve it in this sequel, as well as Riley is suffering again not just from anxiety attacks, but also feels like she has to go into a lot of peer pressure, not just from her peers but from herself. Like to be a better person, you have to make new friends, and to be somewhat of a goofball, and someone have to rate to their music taste, and someone have to like their food and all that. Again, this is a really case of some brilliant writing, not just from the character development of Riley, who is voiced by Kensington Tallman, who she did a really brilliant job voice acting Riley, and also pretty much her mindset, as well as when they experience the sarcasm or Riley in a more of a condescending tone. Her brain seems like it's just gone through a massive landslide or a massive earthquake. Like her brain is like somewhat breaking apart and doesn't feel like it's being true to herself at this point anymore. Which is again, particularly how the film's writing, particularly how it depicts the new, a more fragile mindset of Riley, and of course how her emotions have to navigate it on her own. Particularly how Riley is navigating the ice hockey summer camp literally on her own, and maybe with her new friends. Again, and how the script kind of pulls that off is again amazing as well in my opinion. Even though Pixar has dealt with puberty before, particularly with turning red, but they used an analogy of going poofing up like a big red panda, and also dwelling themes of like generational trauma as well. But for in case of Inside Out 2, it's not just it's about puberty, but it's again about it's okay to go navigate through your emotions, but and also it's a case of Riley being mindful not just of her surroundings but also to herself, and how she's again mentally still just figuring herself out and figuring stuff around her. Like she doesn't still have the answers to everything, even though she is 13 at this point, which is again an incredible scene, incredible analogy that Pixar has done in this movie. Even though yes, it doesn't go into more allegorical territory like something like Tony Red in my opinion, but again how it discusses puberty in definitely a really frank sense as well, particularly in the scene where all the emotions wake up and demolition is already being done to their headquarters, and it's all a complete mess when they just done and walk away from it. Again, that's essentially how you would take a frank look into Puberty, in a sense, at a viewpoint like Pixar has done, which is again really interesting in my opinion. We've grown up, Riley's grown up, of course Pixar's grown up, and of course Inside Out as a film series has grown up in my opinion. Again, how I describe Inside Out 2, it's definitely a grown-up version of Inside Out 2, as in it's basically Riley just maturing into her teenhood and blossoming into new territories, and also navigating new emotions of embarrassment, boredom, envy, and anxiety as well, while still being true to herself, while keeping in touch with her emotions as well. The writing in the movie is amazing. The editing, particularly in Riley's panic attack, is also amazing. The camera work is definitely brilliant. The animation is definitely still top notch from Pixar, particularly in the major highlights in the third act and during Riley's deep dark sequence, where the animation really does come to life, in my opinion. And this is definitely not just a major comeback for Pixar, not just in the commercial sense, but also in a critical sense as well. Like this is a moment where people finally starting to take Pixar a lot more seriously, in my opinion, and definitely feels like Pixar has learned with its audience and grew up with its audience, and of course made a movie that just feels as grown up as its main character, Riley. So for Inside Out 2, I am feeling an 8 or 9 out of 10. So, what do you think of Inside Out 2? Comment down below, like this video, subscribe to my channel, follow me on Twitter and Instagram and Letterboxd, and just a large world, and bye!